What I'd like to do for the rest of the time is just take a look at our website so that you can have an idea of what information is available here. If this is our home page, remember I told you earlier you could search for your audit report. And when you click on that, there'll be a place where you can search your unit. I claim the town of Brownsburg as mine. So I will enter that in, and then you can see, actually it'll show up for everything for Brownsburg, but here's the town of Brownsburg. So I could click on that and take a look at my report. Now, if you're looking for audit results and comments, we were talking about, you're going to want to look in a supplemental report because that's where those are going to be reported. And Todd will be talking about that more tomorrow to remind you of that. All right, a couple of other things I want to show you on this page in the on this banner section here. Remember I talked to you about reporting misappropriation. You can report that by clicking here, and it will ask you for certain pieces of information, and that will come to Todd and I. So you can report that there. You can report a variance over your materiality threshold there too if you want to. So you don't, it doesn't have to just be the fraud section. The other thing that I wanted to tell you about was questions. Now you can always email Todd and I directly at the cities.towns address. Another option is if you can ask SBOA a question, and you can come here and you can click right here to ask your question, and it will ask you to fill out certain pieces of information and type in your question. Another feature we have here are frequently asked questions. So for cities and towns, you could look at the general section. Those should apply to everyone. And you can come down here to the cities and towns section, and it will take you down to those questions that are specific to cities and towns. So if you ever have the question of who's going to track training hours when State Board of Accounts has a state called meeting, you can click on that and it will provide an answer to you. A couple of other nice things here on our front page. In the About Us section, there's a lot of information here. But what I wanted to show you was this glossary of accounting and audit terms. Because as auditors, we all have our own lingo, right? And we have acronyms and sometimes nobody knows what we're talking about. So if you, for example, we use the word GAAP and you don't have any idea what GAAP means, you can go to the G's here and you can look, and here's GAAP, and it will provide you a nice explanation. So you might want to take a look through that glossary. If there's ever a term that either we're using or it's in our audit report and you don't understand it, it should be in this glossary here in the About Us tab. So that's a very nice feature that we have. Also on our homepage down here, I think Paul Joyce mentioned this. We have a lot of memorandums on the coronavirus and how it affects the workings of your office. And if you haven't seen these yet, I would highly encourage you to take a look at them. These first two policies, these were our first ones, and they were on policies related to travel and employee work schedules and things like that at the first part of the pandemic. Very useful for your unit as you develop policies to deal with the situation of coronavirus. Paul Joyce also mentioned continuity of operations. You know, what happens if you get sick or if a key person in your city or town gets sick? How do things continue moving forward for your city or town? So there's some very good questions to think about in formulating a policy if you would take a look at that memorandum. COVID grant accounting and appropriations. A lot of you are receiving CARES Act money or other COVID-19 related money. If you want to know how to account for that or how the appropriation works for those, then you can go to this memorandum and it will tell you that information. So a lot of useful information there on our homepage. Okay, now I told you earlier that if you go over here under political subdivisions and open that up, you'll see that there's a cities page and there's a towns page. And they are very, very similar with the information on there. So today we're just going to go to the towns page because again, it's pretty close to the cities page. And you can see here that you've got our contact information again. We want to make sure that's everywhere because we want to make sure you know how to get a hold of us. And then we'll have right here at the top a hot topics section. And that does change from time to time depending on what's going on that's affecting cities and towns directly. And this year we have newly elected officials training videos. And I hope you know about these and I hope you've been able to watch them. There is a lot of very useful information in there about getting started in your office. And all you have to do is click on this, and then the handout is the slides that go along with it. Or as in the case of official bonds, there's a lot of different handouts with that one. Those are listed there as well. So if you haven't had a chance to look at these, please do. I mentioned repeat findings earlier. Repeat findings do require a corrective action plan. So that's why it's so important that you go back now to your old audit reports or your prior audit report and see if there's anything that needs to be corrected, because you really don't want to have to file a corrective action plan. But if you do, there's a template here for you to use, and the field examiners during the audit, they will explain all of this to you, and there will be written instructions here, and you would submit it here. So if you find yourself in a situation where you have a repeat finding, then this is where you would want to go on our website. Now, as you all know, internal controls are extremely important, and Todd and I train on internal controls quite frequently. There is a separate section in our on our website regarding internal controls. I'm sure that many of you have probably heard that all personnel that have anything to do with receiving or dispersing of funds are required to watch the internal controls webinar, and that's the one that's right here. So this is where you'll find that. And once that form has been, or once that video has been watched, then you'll want to have your employees fill out this certification form here. I'll show you what that looks like. It's just got their name and position, the training that they watched, and how much time. I think the video is about 25 minutes, and then they sign that. And you're going to want to keep that for audit because our field examiners will be asking about that. Right, also on this, and I was going to say that we often get the question of, do council members have to watch the internal controls training video? We highly encourage council members to watch the video because they are an integral part of internal control, but we have not taken audit exception for council members not watching that, but we do highly encourage it. Other than that, all employees who have anything to do with the receiving and dispersing of funds must watch that video. And we do have a manual. It's commonly referred to as the internal control manual, but this is the actual title of it right here. And that has a lot of useful information that I just want to kind of introduce you to. Again, Todd and I will do quite a bit of training on internal controls yet this year and next year. So you can see in the introduction, there's definitions of internal controls and organizational roles, like what role the clerk treasurer would play or what role counsel would play. There are procedures for the adoption of an internal control policy and training for employees. Counsel is required to adopt the minimum level of internal control standards, and they should have, your unit should have had that done already. If your counsel wants to, so your counsel doesn't need to re-adopt it if it's already been adopted. So you're going to want to find that resolution that adopted the minimum internal control standards, just so that you have that. If your council wants to, if you have a new council and they want to re-adopt it, they can do that, but they don't have to. You just need to adopt that once. And then the training for employees, every employee that has any duties regarding receiving and dispersing of funds, they do have to watch the video I showed you, but they only need to watch it one time. And then you'll just keep that certification form as documentation. Now, part 1 here talks about the 5 components of internal controls, and there are 17 principles that go along with that. Those are very detailed. It's very good information in there and important to understand. And then in section 2, the video that's required, the slides are in that section. There are examples of internal control procedures. For example, if you think that you might be a little bit weak on receipting activities, you can go to that section and there will be a bunch of examples of things that you might want to think about incorporating into your receipting process. And then in section 3, there are some case studies, and those are studies they were taken from our audit reports where there was a lack of internal controls. And we discussed what controls could have prevented or detected that particular issue. So again, that's a very important section, and we will do more training on that. Now, I mentioned earlier that when we have a comment in a report, we can either write up non-compliance for failure to comply with a statute, or with our uniform compliance guidelines. So if you want to know what those are, they are right here. They're made up of state examiner directives, manuals, and bulletins. Now, the state examiner directives are it's really clarifying guidance from the state examiner on certain requirements for your office. For example, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund and the Motor Vehicle Highway Restricted Subfund. If you have questions on what our position is or how that should be accounted for, you can go to this Directive 2018-2 and you can find out that information. Most of you probably know that due to COVID, there has been some adjustments for timely deposits and the claims process. If you want to know more information about that, you could go to Directive 2020-1. So this is all very important information for cities and towns here. Okay, as far as manuals are concerned, we have several. We have the Accounting and Financial Regulatory Reporting Manual, which is going to tell you everything you need to know about the regulatory basis of accounting, which is the basis of accounting that's been prescribed by the state examiner for most of our units. There are some cities that are required to be on a GAAP basis, but by and large, and they know who they are, but by and large, most of you are on a regulatory basis. So if you have any question on what that involves, you can go into that manual. We also have the internal control manual that I talked about earlier. There's an information technology manual that has a good framework in what is required for accounting software systems. So if you're thinking of a new accounting software system, you might want to take a look at this manual or take it to your vendor to talk about the various items in there. There's a lot of controls in there to be considered. But Todd and I spend most of our time in this, I went to the city's page, but the Uniform Compliance Guidelines Manual. So I want to go over that for a few minutes to kind of highlight some various things that are in this manual. Chapter 1 has just a lot of good information. For example, if you would like to know, can I use a form in lieu of a prescribed form if it has all the same information? Well, that question is answered here in this article entitled Prescribed Forms. So you could read through that and see if your situation would be permitted there. We also have a section called General Information. And as I look through that, what I think this is uniform compliance guidelines that we see cited frequently, or maybe not cited frequently, but we get a lot of questions on them. So I would really recommend that you go through and take a look at this section just to kind of peruse it and see if you have any of these questions. For example, right there at the top on advance payments, sometimes the clerk treasurer will call us and say that they're being requested to pay an invoice for services that have not even been received yet. They're not even going to be received for several months. And can they do that? And the answer is right here in this compliance guideline, that compensation and any other payments for goods or services must not be paid in advance of the receipt of the good or services unless it's specifically authorized by law. So this will help you as you go about all of the transactions of your office to see what is allowed and what is not allowed, or what is required even. There's a section here on capital assets and what's required in the accounting of those. Condition of records, at all times all of your ledgers and your bank balances should agree. Those sorts of things are in this section. And once you get out of that general information section, there's a section on local policies. Again, we will have some training for you on this at a later time, but these are the policies that we think every unit should have if they're applicable to your unit. And an example of that would be credit cards. Every unit that has a credit card should have a credit card policy. If you don't have a credit card, you wouldn't need one. But these are policies that our field examiners will look for during an audit. So it would be good to go through your office and see if you can locate these policies, again, if they are applicable to you, so that you can have those in one place, because these provide you the authority that you need to pay the claims that you need to pay. And then the last section of this chapter is on deposits and investments. We do get a fair amount of questions on what investments are authorized. That you can find in Indiana Code 513.9, and that is cited in this part of the chapter. We also get questions on how you post investments to your records, both when you purchase an investment, when you sell an investment, and when you receive interest, or if you renew a certificate of deposit. How is all of that supposed to be shown on your records? And that is all answered in this last part of chapter 1. So this is a very good chapter to take a look at. Chapter 2 is kind of an introduction. It contains a lot of accounting principles and definitions, and it also in here has a sample bank reconciliation. Todd is going to go over bank reconciliations with you later today, because that's such an important part of what you do. But that is in this section. And then one of the most popularly referred to pages that we have, especially toward year end, is on 210. And that's talking about transfers of appropriation. You know, you'll find that at year end, maybe you don't have quite enough appropriation in one category, but you have more than you need in another. And how do you make those transfers, and what is required by way of approval of council. So those questions are all answered on this page 2-10, and there's even a transfer ordinance in here for you to take a look at there. In Chapter 3, we have the accounting plan and procedures. Again, many accounting principles throughout all of this. We do have information on the various types of funds. For example, the general fund and what that means, special revenue funds, debt service funds, and capital projects funds. You can read about all of those, and we also have training to provide on those, but I wanted you to know that the information is in the manual if you need to know that. Another thing that you need to know about in this chapter is our list of funds and the correct fund numbers for those. These funds that are listed here are statutory funds, and they have been assigned a number under our prescribed accounting system. So if you will have a local road and street account, that should be fund number 202. If you have a motor vehicle highway fund, and you do, it will be fund 201. If you have levy excess, it would be 208. So it is a good idea to go back and look at your accounting system and see if these numbers are the numbers that are used in your accounting system, or if there is some kind of a crosswalk between the number that's used in your accounting system versus these numbers here. Also back in that chapter, sometimes we get questions on what is included in a certain object of expense, and that information is in this chapter as well. Chapter 4, a lot of the information Todd is going to talk to you about this afternoon is in this chapter, and that is on the various funds and what their sources of money are and what their uses are. So for example, the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund, if you wanted to know more about that fund, you could come to this chapter. It has the Indiana Code reference. It has the primary purposes of that fund. We always do recommend that you always go back to the statute, because that is the authoritative source of information for what the fund can be used for. But it does have the general scope, and it will also have the receipts of money that go in to this fund. So that's all very useful information in Chapter 4. And again, Todd will be going through many of the funds later today. Now, if you have a city or town court, then Chapter 5 would be for you to go through and know how to account for those court funds. Chapter 6 is our forms. We do have prescribed forms for every unit of government, and for cities and towns, those are listed in here. Now, we understand that many of you, most of you actually, are on a computerized accounting system, so you're not going to be using these exact forms, but your computer system should have all of the same information available to you that are on these forms. But if you ever have a question on what forms are prescribed, they are listed here. And then you can go on down, and there's actually sample forms in here so that you can see what they look like. Then Chapter 7 is a calendar of monthly duties. This is not an exhaustive list by any means of duties that have to be performed each month, but they are those that our agency is most involved with. So you can go through and take a look at that. And then toward the end of this chapter, you'll find some addresses of places. Toward the end of this chapter, there are some additional uniform compliance guidelines that are there for you to read. And they're in certain categories. So for example, if you wanted to know some uniform compliance guidelines on the claims, then you could go down to the claims section and take a look at those. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those miscellaneous guidelines as you have time. We also have a court manual for city and for court clerks. So they'll be using this manual here for their accounting. And the only thing I wanted to point out to you on this section here is a couple of charts that we have added this year. If you would like to see the court costs and fees by case type, or if you would like to see court costs by alphabetical listing, that's a very handy chart. For example, if you wondered about the alcohol and drug services program fee, you can see the statute that that's collected under, the statute it's distributed under, and you can see that 100% goes to your city or town, and that 2 means that it goes in the user fee fund. So that's a nice chart to be able to keep track of all of those court fees. The third section here is our bulletins. We have 10 years of bulletins on this page, and our bulletins do come out once a quarter, so you should be receiving those. If not, let us know and we'll get you on the list for that, or you can always come to our website. They're of course posted here. You can view the index to the bulletins by clicking here. And then, for example, if you need to find something on, let's say, the cash reserve fund, you could just type that in and it will take you to that section. The statute for this one is listed here, and you can see that the last article we had on that for procedures was in September of 2014. And then you can go back to the bulletin for September of 2014 and you can take a look at that. So our bulletins do have a wealth of information in them. We hope that you find those to be very useful. Now, presentation and training materials, that is just what it says. All of the PDFs of our PowerPoint slides are in this section. So if you wondered where today's and tomorrow's are, they are right here. We also have a YouTube channel that I wanted to show you. So you can go to this channel, and all of those newly elected official videos that I was telling you about, and you could access actually from the cities or towns page. You can also access them here, and it will list all of them. Then we also have some additional State Board of Accounts videos that you can watch. For example, here's one on capital assets. There's another that is the internal controls webinar. And then on forms prior to audit, which we'll be talking to you about that one tomorrow. Best practices goes right directly along with internal controls. We were finding that our units needed some assistance in items to think about for internal controls. So our office went through some of the most common areas and tried to do that. So let's say, for example, with bank reconciliations, you think that you need some additional procedures to make sure that your internal controls are sufficient, but you're not really sure what those controls might be. You can click on this. This is the long version, but it has so much good information in it. It will talk about the 5 components of internal controls. So you can see here's the control environment. That's the first one. And it has a definition there. And then it has items for you to think about as you establish your control environment for the bank reconciliation. And you can go through and you can check, yes, we do this, or no, we don't do this, or no, I don't want to do that, but yes, I do want to do this one. You can go through and check all of those and really come up with a solid internal control policy or procedure for your bank reconciliation. Now, that was the long version. There's a shorter version if you want to take a look at that one. It doesn't have as many definitions on it, and it doesn't have as many questions either. But again, you can go through and take a look and see if there are some things in here that you would like to implement in your city or town. So that is very useful. I highly encourage everyone to take a look at those. See, Indiana codes. I just wanted you to know this was here. You can access the Indiana code, of course, at iga.in.gov. That's through the Attorney General, the Indiana General Assembly webpage. But if you want to look at just some topical items, for example, you want to know more about the public purchasing law, and you can click here. And you can see that we have all of the definitions. There's a lot of definitions, isn't there, for the public purchasing law. And then you can come down to the general rules. Like, what if I have a purchase that's less than $50,000? Well, you see here that the purchasing agent can purchase that in accordance with their small purchase policy. It's another policy that you have that's listed in that Chapter 1. But if I have a purchase over $150,000, then I have other requirements. And of course, there are always exceptions to the general rules. You can come down and look at those, or some special purchasing methods. So again, I wanted to make sure that you knew that that was available for you as a topical listing of the Indiana codes there. There's a lot of really good information there. Gateway you can access from here, and there's user guides and additional explanations. If you have to upload, if you're uploading information from your computer system, all of that stuff, all of that information is in here. Comments regarding our SBOA staff. When Todd and I have gone out to the conferences like we usually do, we always hear such good comments about our field staff. If you have some comments to make, whether good or bad, you can go here and enter that information so that our board can hear what you have to say regarding our State Board of Accounts staff. And then here's one more place that if you want to report either a misappropriation of funds or a variance that exceeds your materiality threshold, then you can come here under 511-127 and fill out that information. And then that will be sent to me or to Todd, or both of us actually. So I hope that was helpful for you to know the information that's on our website. There is a lot of information there, and Todd and I train on, each one of these aspects. But today we just wanted to give you an overview of our agency and the information that we have that was available to you. So I hope that was helpful.